17-year-old Billionaire was bullied at school. What happened next was shocking. The piercing wail of sirens cut through the crisp autumn air as Garrett Jacobs sprinted across the hospital parking lot. His heart pounded in his chest, each breath burning in his lungs as he pushed himself harder, faster. Time seemed to slow as he spotted the small figure teetering on the edge of the hospital roof, silhouetted against the setting sun. "Wait!" Garrett shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Please don't do this." The figure turned, revealing the tear-stained face of a young boy, no more than 12 years old. His eyes, wide with fear and anguish, met Garrett's for a brief moment before he took a step back, closer to the edge. Garrett's mind raced, memories of his own darkest moments flashing before his eyes. And he knew the pain of feeling utterly alone, of believing the world would be better off without him. Yet he also knew the power of a single act of kindness, the warmth of a helping hand reaching out in the darkness. "I know it hurts," Garrett said, his voice softer now as he inched closer. "I know it feels like there's no way out. But I promise you there is. You're not alone." The boy's lip trembled, a flicker of hope battling against the despair in his eyes. "But you don't know me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant sirens. "You don't know what I've done." "What's he done?" Garrett took another careful step forward, his hand outstretched. "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I know what it's like to feel lost, to feel like you're drowning and no one can see you struggling. Let me help you, please." For a moment that felt like an eternity, the world held its breath. Then, slowly, the boy reached out and took Garrett's hand. As Garrett pulled him into a tight embrace, away from the edge and back to safety, he felt a familiar ache in his chest, a bittersweet mixture of relief and shared pain. As paramedics rushed forward to take care of the boy, Garrett stepped back, his legs suddenly weak. He watched as the boy was led away, catching one last glimpse of gratitude in those young eyes before they disappeared into the crowd of emergency responders. Garrett closed his eyes, letting out a shaky breath. In that moment he was no longer on the hospital roof, but back in his own room, 3 years earlier, staring at a bottle of pills and wondering if anyone would even notice if he was gone. Garrett Jacobs grew up in a world of privilege where money flowed as freely as the champagne at his father's lavish parties. Their sprawling mansion, with its manicured lawns and marble fountains, was a testament to the Jacobs family's wealth and status. But for Garrett, it was nothing more than a gilded cage, cold and empty despite its opulence. From the outside, Garrett had everything a teenager could want. The latest gadgets, designer clothes, and a sleek sports car sat unused in the garage. Yet what he craved most, the warmth of a loving family, remained frustratingly out of reach. And his father, Alexander Jacobs, was a titan of industry, a man whose very name opened doors and commanded respect in boardrooms across the country. But within the walls of their home, Alexander was little more than a ghost, his presence marked only by the echo of phone calls and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in empty hallways. Garrett's mother, Evelyn, had been the heart of their family, her laughter filling the halls with a warmth that made their house feel like a home. She had a way of making everyone feel seen and valued, from the gardener to the governor. Garrett remembered how she would sneak into his room late at night, long after his father had declared it was time for bed, just to read him one more story or listen to his dreams for the future. But all that changed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Garrett was just 10 years old. The memory of that day was seared into his mind, the squealing of tires, the sickening crunch of metal, and then silence. In the blink of an eye, Evelyn Jacobs was gone, leaving behind a void that seemed to swallow everything in its wake. In the years that followed, Garrett watched as his father retreated further into his work, burying his grief beneath endless meetings and overseas business trips. The once vibrant home became a mausoleum filled with painful reminders of what they had lost. Garrett tried everything to break through the wall his father had built around himself. He threw himself into his studies, bringing home perfect report cards and trophies from debate competitions. He took up piano, spending hours practicing until his fingers ached, hoping that the melodies might somehow reach his father's heart. But no matter what he achieved, Alexander's response was always the same: a distracted nod, a mumbled "good job," and then a quick retreat to his study. As the loneliness grew, Garrett found himself drawn to his mother's old volunteer work. He started small, helping out at local food banks and animal shelters. There, surrounded by people who genuinely needed help, he found a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life. For a few hours each week, he wasn't Garrett Jacobs' heir to a fortune, but just Garrett, a pair of helping hands and a kind word for those who needed it most. But even as he found solace in helping others, the emptiness at home continued to gnaw at him. Nights were the hardest, when the silence of the house seemed to press in from all sides. Garrett would often find himself standing in front of his mother's portrait in the main hall, tracing the curve of a smile with his eyes and wondering if she would be proud of the person he was becoming. On his 16th birthday, Garrett woke to find a small, neatly wrapped package outside his door. His heart leapt, hope flaring in his chest. Had his father remembered? With trembling fingers, he tore open the wrapping to find a platinum credit card and a note in his father's crisp handwriting: "For whatever you need, Dad." The disappointment was crushing. Garrett stared at the card, this cold piece of plastic that was supposed to replace genuine care and affection. In that moment, something inside him hardened. He made a silent vow to himself he would find a way to make a difference in the world, with or without his father's approval. As his senior year approached, Garrett made a decision that would change the course of his life. Instead of applying to the Ivy League schools his father expected, he chose Brookside High, a public school on the other side of town. It was a chance to start fresh, to be known for who he was rather than for his family name or bank account. The night before his first day at Brookside, Garrett stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the collar of his carefully chosen, non-designer shirt. He barely recognized the person staring back at him. Gone was the polished, privileged boy who had everything handed to him. In his place stood someone determined to carve his own path, to find meaning beyond the wealth that had always defined him. As he turned to leave, his eyes fell on a small framed photo of his mother. Her eyes seemed to twinkle with the same mischievous light he remembered, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice: "Be brave, my darling. Be kind, and always, always be true to yourself." With a deep breath, Garrett squared his shoulders and headed out, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him at Brookside High. So did he know the journey ahead would test him in ways he never imagined, forcing him to confront not only the prejudices of others, but also the deepest parts of himself. The morning sun cast a warm glow over Brookside High, illuminating the freshly cut lawns and brick buildings. Garrett Jacobs stood at the entrance, taking a deep breath. The butterflies in his stomach fluttered furiously as he clutched his backpack straps, surveying the bustling courtyard. Students laughed and chattered in groups, seemingly unaware of the new presence among them. Garrett was tall for his age, with dark hair neatly combed to the side. His blue eyes scanned the scene with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. And he wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, his attire carefully chosen to blend in rather than stand out. Despite his best efforts, there was an air of quiet confidence about him, an indication of a life lived differently from the typical high school student. He walked through the courtyard, his steps measured and deliberate. The noise around him was almost overwhelming, but he maintained a calm exterior. As he approached the main building, a group of students had gathered near the entrance. "Hey, you must be new here," a boy said, stepping forward. He was lanky with sandy hair and a friendly smile. "I'm Cody." "Yeah, I'm Garrett," he replied, his voice steady but soft. He extended his hand, and Cody shook it with enthusiasm. "Welcome to Brookside. It's not as bad as it looks," Cody said with a grin. Garrett chuckled, appreciating the attempt to lighten the mood. As they walked together towards the cafeteria, Garrett noticed Cody's clothes were a bit worn, his shoes scuffed. There was a slight hesitation in Cody's steps as they approached the lunch line. "I hope you have your lunch account set up," Cody said, a hint of worry in his voice. "They can be pretty strict about it." Garrett nodded, pulling out his wallet. As Cody tried to pay for his lunch, the cashier frowned. "I'm sorry, Cody, but you don't have any credit left." Cody's face fell, and he glanced around nervously. "Oh, my parents said they would take care of it, so they must have forgotten." Garrett watched the exchange silently. He could feel Cody's embarrassment and the sympathetic glances from nearby students. Without a word, he stepped forward, handing the cashier a bill. "Here, can you put this on his account?" The cashier looked surprised but took the money. "Are you sure?" "That's a lot." Garrett nodded, avoiding Cody's questioning gaze. "It's fine. Please." Cody's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Garrett. You didn't have to do that." Garrett shrugged, offering a small smile. "No big deal. Everyone needs a little help sometimes." Their conversation was interrupted by a loud laugh from across the room. Aaron, a tall, athletic student with a cocky demeanor, was holding court with his friends. He glanced over at Garrett and Cody, his expression turning from amusement to disdain. "Who's the new charity case?" Aaron called out, loud enough for the cafeteria to hear. His friend snickered, and Garrett felt a pang of irritation. Ignoring the comment, Garrett and Cody found a table at the far end of the cafeteria. "I don't mind Aaron," Cody said quietly. "He's always like that. Thinks he runs the place." Garrett nodded, but his eyes lingered on Aaron. There was something in the way Aaron carried himself that Garrett had seen before, back at his old school. It was the look of someone who needed to assert control to hide their own insecurities. As the lunch period wore on, Garrett and Cody talked more. Cody shared bits about his life, his parents' recent struggles, and how he was trying to keep his grades up despite everything. Garrett listened intently, offering quiet encouragement and sharing little about his own life. By the time the bell rang signaling the end of lunch, Garrett felt a sense of connection with Cody. As he walked to his next class, he could feel Aaron's eyes on him, the first sparks of an unspoken rivalry igniting in the air. The rest of the day passed in a blur of new faces, unfamiliar classrooms, and the constant hum of activity that defined high school life. Garrett found himself both exhausted and exhilarated by the time the final bell rang. As he made his way towards the exit, a girl with auburn hair and kind eyes fell into step beside him. "You're Garrett, right?" she asked. "I'm CLA. I saw what you did for Cody at lunch. That was really nice of you." Garrett felt a flush of embarrassment. "It wasn't a big deal," he mumbled. CLE smiled. "Maybe not to you, but it meant a lot to Cody and to me. He's my best friend, and things have been tough for him lately." As they walked, CLA filled Garrett in on some of the unspoken dynamics at Brookside High. The school sat on the border between two very different neighborhoods, one affluent, the other struggling. This created a stark divide among the student body, with tensions often running high. "It's not always obvious," CLA explained, her voice low. "But there's a lot of discrimination that goes on here. The administration tries to ignore it, but it's there if you know where to look." Garrett felt a knot forming in his stomach. He had chosen Brookside to escape the privilege of his old life, but it seemed he had stepped into a whole new set of challenges. As they reached the parking lot, CLA touched his arm lightly. "Listen, a bunch of us are getting together at the park this weekend to study and hang out. You should come if you're free." Garrett hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, that sounds great, thanks." As he watched CLA walk away, Garrett felt a mix of emotions washing over him. He had come to Brookside seeking a fresh start, a chance to define himself on his own terms. But now, standing in the fading afternoon light, he realized that his journey was just beginning. The sound of laughter drew his attention, and he saw Aaron and his friends piling into an expensive sports car. Aaron caught Garrett's eye and smirked before peeling out of the parking lot in a cloud of dust. Garrett took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. He had faced challenges before, and he would face them again. As he began the walk home, his mind was already racing with thoughts of how he could make a difference at Brookside High. Little did he know, the decisions he would make in the coming weeks and months would not only change his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The stage was set for a year of growth, conflict, and unexpected alliances that would shake Brookside High to its very foundations. As Garrett settled into life at Brookside High, his reputation for kindness began to grow. It started small, almost imperceptibly, with little acts that most people wouldn't think twice about. He'd help someone pick up their dropped books, offer a pencil to a classmate who'd forgotten theirs, or stay behind after class to explain a difficult concept to a struggling student. But as days turned into weeks, these small gestures began to add up. People started to notice the new kid who always seemed to be there when someone needed a hand. Garrett didn't do it for recognition or praise. He did it because it was the right thing to do, because he remembered what it felt like to be alone and in need of kindness. One particularly memorable incident occurred during a crowded passing period. Garrett noticed a freshman, small for his age, being jostled and pushed around by the surging crowd. Without hesitation, Garrett stepped in, using his taller frame to create a buffer around the younger student. As they navigated the hallway together, Garrett learned the boy's name was Tommy, and it was his first week at Brookside. "Thanks," Tommy said, his voice barely audible above the din of the hallway. "I thought I was going to get trampled." Garrett smiled warmly. "No problem. The first week can be tough. If you ever need help finding your way around, just let me know." From that day on, Tommy became a familiar face, often seeking Garrett out between classes or at lunch. It wasn't long before other freshmen started gravitating towards Garrett as well, seeing him as a safe harbor in the sometimes turbulent waters of high school. But Garrett's acts of kindness weren't limited to his fellow students. He noticed that Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, often struggled to reach books on the higher shelves. Without being asked, Garrett began spending his free periods in the library, quietly restocking shelves and helping Mrs. Henderson with whatever task she needed. "You're a good boy, Garrett," Mrs. Henderson said one day, her eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. "Not many young people these days take the time to notice others' needs." Garrett felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. It was moments like these that made him feel truly alive, truly himself. However, not everyone at Brookside appreciated Garrett's growing reputation. Aaron and his group of friends watched with increasing annoyance as Garrett's influence spread. To them, Garrett's kindness was a threat to the social order they had worked so hard to establish. "Look at him," Aaron sneered one day, watching as Garrett helped a girl with her heavy art portfolio. "Always playing the hero, it's pathetic." But even as Aaron's hostility grew, others were drawn to Garrett's genuine warmth. CLA and Cody became his closest friends, and together they formed a tight-knit group that began to challenge the unspoken divisions at Brookside. One afternoon, Garrett noticed Cody staring dejectedly at a flyer for the school's annual academic decathlon. "You thinking of signing up?" Garrett asked. Cody shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. "No point. They never pick kids from my neighborhood for the team. It's always the rich kids from the north side." Garrett felt a familiar surge of indignation. "That's not right. You're one of the smartest people I know. You should definitely try out." With some encouragement from Garrett and CLA, Cody reluctantly agreed to sign up. On the day of the tryouts, Garrett and CLA sat in the back of the auditorium, silently cheering Cody on as he answered question after question with confidence and precision. When the team roster was posted a week later, Cody's name was on it. The look of pure joy and disbelief on his face when he saw it was something Garrett would never forget. "Oh, I can't believe it," Cody said, his voice choked with emotion. "I never thought I'd have a chance." Garrett squeezed his friend's shoulder. "You earned it, Cody. You belong on that team." But even as Garrett celebrated his friend's success, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The more he saw of life at Brookside, the more he realized how deep the inequalities ran. That wasn't just about academic teams or lunch accounts, it was about opportunities, expectations, and the very future that students could imagine for themselves. Garrett found himself lying awake at night, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could make a real difference. He knew that small acts of kindness were important, but he also felt a growing urgency to address the larger systemic issues at play. One evening, as he sat at his desk, trying to focus on homework, his eyes fell on a framed photo of his mother. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed to hold a challenge. "What are you going to do about it?" her eyes seemed to ask. Garrett took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose settle over him. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew he had to try. With renewed determination, he opened his laptop and began researching educational inequality and student advocacy. As the screen glowed in the dimness of his room, Garrett felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. He was stepping into unknown territory, potentially risking the fragile sense of belonging he had built at Brookside. But deep down, he knew it was the right thing to do. Little did Garrett know his actions in the coming weeks would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge the very foundations of Brookside High, forcing everyone, students, teachers, and administrators alike, to confront the uncomfortable truths they had long ignored. The stage was set for a battle that would test Garrett's resolve, challenge his friendships, and ultimately reveal the true strength of his character. As he closed his laptop and got ready for bed, Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. If you've been captivated by Garrett's journey, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button now to stay updated on his inspiring story of courage and kindness at Brookside High. As autumn leaves began to paint Brookside in shades of gold and crimson, Garrett found himself settling into a routine. School, study sessions with Cody and CLA, and his part-time job at Mercy General Hospital filled his days. The hospital work had started as a requirement for his advanced biology class, but Garrett quickly discovered it offered much more than just academic credit. On a particularly chilly October evening, Garrett was making his rounds in the pediatric ward, delivering snacks and small comforts to the young patients. As he approached room 305, he heard a familiar voice that made him freeze in his tracks. "Come on, Lily, you need to eat something. Please, for me." The pleading tone was unmistakable. It was Aaron, the very same Aaron who had been making Garrett's life at Brookside a constant challenge. Curiosity overrode caution, and Garrett peeked around the doorframe. The sight that greeted him was so at odds with Aaron's public persona that Garrett had to blink to make sure he wasn't imagining things. Aaron, the cocky, self-assured bully of Brookside High, sat hunched over a hospital bed, gently coaxing a frail young girl to take a spoonful of soup. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, bore a striking resemblance to Aaron, the same sandy hair, the same stubborn set to her jaw. "I don't want it, Aaron," the girl Lily whined. "It tastes as yucky." Aaron's shoulders slumped, defeat etched in every line of his body. "I know, Lil, but you have to eat to get strong. Remember what the doctors said." It was at that moment that Aaron glanced up and locked eyes with Garrett. For a split second, naked fear flashed across Aaron's face, quickly replaced by his usual mask of hostility. "What are you doing here, Jacobs?" Aaron snarled, rising to his feet. "Come to spy on me." Garrett held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I work here part-time," he explained, gesturing to his volunteer badge. "I was just doing my rounds." Aaron's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but before he could respond, Lily's small voice piped up. "Who's that, Aaron? Is he your friend?" The question hung in the air, laden with an innocence that made both boys shift uncomfortably. Aaron opened his mouth, likely to deliver a scathing denial, but Garrett beat him to it. "I'm Garrett," he said, stepping fully into the room and addressing Lily directly. "I go to school with your brother, and I couldn't help but overhear that you're not too fond of the soup." Lily wrinkled her nose. "It's gross." Garrett nodded solemnly. "Hospital food can be pretty tough. But you know what? I think I might have something that could help." He reached into his cart and pulled out a small bottle of flavored syrup, a trick he'd learned from one of the nurses for making medicine more palatable. "How about we add a little magic to that soup?" Lily's eyes widened with interest, and even Aaron seemed to relax slightly, curiosity overtaking his initial hostility. With a theatrical flourish, Garrett added a few drops of the berry-flavored syrup to the soup, stirring it gently. "There we go. Want to give it a try now?" To everyone's surprise, Lily nodded eagerly. She took a tentative sip, and a smile broke across her pale face. "It's good," she exclaimed, taking another spoonful. The relief on Aaron's face was palpable. He watched in amazement as his sister, who had been refusing food all day, finished the entire bowl of soup. And when Lily finally put down the spoon, her eyelids growing heavy, Aaron turned to Garrett with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Thanks," he muttered, the word seeming to cost him great effort. I didn't know you worked here." Garrett shrugged. "Like I said, it's a part-time thing. I like helping out where I can." An awkward silence fell between them, years of animosity warring with this new, unexpected moment of connection. Finally, Aaron spoke again, his voice low and strained. "Listen, about Lily, I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone at school. She's been sick for a while, and I don't want people's pity or—" "I won't say anything," Garrett interrupted, understanding immediately. "It's not my story to tell." Aaron nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. As Garrett turned to leave, he heard Aaron's voice once more. "Garrett, thanks for real." In that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't friendship, not by a long shot, but it was a crack in the wall of hostility that had defined their relationship since Garrett's arrival at Brookside. As Garrett continued his rounds that night, his mind whirled with this new information. The Aaron he had seen in that hospital room was so far removed from the swaggering bully at school that it was hard to reconcile the two. It made Garrett wonder what other hidden struggles his classmates might be facing, what unseen battles they fought behind closed doors. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had been so focused on the obvious inequalities at Brookside, the clear divide between the haves and have-nots, that he had overlooked the more subtle, personal challenges that cut across all social lines. Aaron's situation was a stark reminder that appearances could be deceiving, that everyone, regardless of their background or behavior, had their own burdens to bear. This epiphany sparked a new determination in Garrett. He realized that truly making a difference at Brookside wouldn't just be about addressing systemic inequalities, though that remained vitally important. It would also require fostering a culture of empathy and understanding, creating a space where students felt safe to be vulnerable, to share their struggles and support one another. As he finished his shift and headed home, the cool night air crisp against his face, Garrett felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead would be challenging, fraught with obstacles, both expected and unforeseen, but he was more convinced than ever that it was a path worth taking. Little did Garrett know, the events set in motion that night in the hospital would soon spiral far beyond his control, testing his resolve, his relationships, and his very identity in ways he could never have imagined. A real battle for the soul of Brookside High was just beginning, and Garrett would find himself at its very center. The following weeks at Brookside High were marked by a palpable tension. Garrett's encounter with Aaron at the hospital had shifted something in their dynamic, but it wasn't immediately apparent to the rest of the student body. Yet on the surface, life continued as usual, classes droned on, homework piled up, and the social hierarchy remained seemingly intact. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, changes were brewing. Garrett found himself watching his classmates with new eyes, wondering what hidden struggles each of them might be facing. He noticed the dark circles under Jenny Thompson's eyes, how she always seemed to be yawning in first period. Was she working a night job to help support her family? He saw how Max Chen flinched whenever someone raised their voice, even in jest. what was happening in his home life. These observations fueled Garrett's determination to make a difference. He began by approaching Mr. Hendricks, the school counselor, with an idea for a peer support group. "I think a lot of students are dealing with things they don't feel comfortable talking about," Garrett explained. "Maybe if we had a safe space where everyone could share without judgment." Mr. Hendricks listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "It's an interesting idea, Garrett," he said finally, "but I'm not sure the administration would go for it. They tend to prefer, well, let's say they like to keep things looking good on paper." Garrett felt a flare of frustration. But isn't helping students more important than looking good? The counselor sighed, a weary sound that spoke volumes about the battles he'd fought and lost. In an ideal world, yes, but Brookside isn't an ideal world, Garrett. There are complexities you might not be aware of. Undeterred, Garrett decided to take matters into his own hands. With CLA and Cody's help, he began organizing informal meetups after school. They started small, just a handful of students gathering in the park to talk about their day, share concerns, and offer support. But word spread quickly, and soon their little group was growing. It was during one of these meetups that Garrett noticed Aaron hovering at the edge of the park, watching them with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Aaron turned and walked away. Garrett couldn't help but wonder if Aaron had been considering joining them. As their unofficial support group gained traction, Garrett began to see more clearly the deep-seated issues plaguing Brookside High. The divide between the affluent North Side students and those from the less privileged South Side was more than just an economic gap. It was a chasm of opportunity and expectation. He overheard a teacher advising a bright South Side student not to bother applying to top colleges because they don't usually accept kids from this neighborhood. He watched as North Side students were automatically placed in advanced classes, while equally capable South Side students were tracked into remedial courses. The injustice of it all made Garrett's blood boil. He started speaking up in class, challenging these assumptions and biases. When Mrs. Lawson, the English teacher, made a dismissive comment about those people not valuing education, Garrett couldn't stay silent. "With all due respect, Mrs. Lawson," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I think that's an unfair generalization. Many students from the South Side are just as dedicated to their education, but they face obstacles that others don't." The classroom fell silent, tension thick in the air. Mrs. Lawson's face flushed red. "Mr. Jacobs, I don't think you understand the realities of teaching in a school like this." "Maybe not," Garrett conceded, "but I do understand that every student deserves a fair chance. And right now, that's not happening at Brookside." The bell rang, cutting off any further discussion, but Garrett could feel the impact of his words rippling through the classroom. Some students looked at him with newfound respect, while others seemed uncomfortable, as if he'd given voice to something they'd long tried to ignore. As word of Garrett's confrontation spread, it sparked heated debates throughout the school. Some students rallied behind his message, emboldened to speak out about their own experiences of discrimination. Others, particularly those who benefited from the status quo, pushed back hard. Tension came to a head one afternoon when Garrett found his locker vandalized, crude words spray painted across it. "Go back to your mansion, rich boy." The sight hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd been so focused on helping others that he'd almost forgotten how his own privileged background set him apart. As he stood there, staring at the hateful message, he felt a presence beside him. It was Aaron, his face uncharacteristically serious. "This is messed up," Aaron said quietly. Garrett nodded, unable to find words. To his surprise, Aaron reached into his backpack and pulled out a rag and some cleaning solution. "Come on," Aaron said gruffly. "Let's clean this crap off." As they worked side by side to remove the graffiti, Garrett felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at whoever had done this, gratitude for Aaron's unexpected help, and a renewed determination to fight for change at Brookside. "Why are you doing this?" Garrett asked as they finished cleaning. "I thought you hated me." Aaron was quiet for a long moment. "I don't hate you," he said finally. I don't know. Things are complicated." Garrett nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. "Yeah, they are." As they parted ways, Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that this incident marked a turning point. The battle lines at Brookside were being redrawn, and he was at the center of it all. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But looking at his now clean locker, Garrett felt a surge of hope. Change was possible. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth fighting forever was. Little did he know, the true test of his resolve was yet to come. The forces opposing change at Brookside were powerful and deeply entrenched. As Garrett prepared to take his fight to the next level, he would soon discover just how high the stakes really were, and how much he stood to lose in the process. The crisp autumn air had given way to winter's chill when the incident occurred that would change everything at Brookside High. It started innocently enough. Garrett was working his usual shift at the hospital, moving between rooms with his cart of supplies and snacks. He had just finished helping an elderly patient with her dinner when his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. It was a text from "Cody, dude, you need to see this. N.O. Dow." Attached was a link to a video. Frowning, Garrett tapped on it, and his stomach dropped as the footage began to play. There he was in his volunteer uniform, carefully helping Lily, Aaron's sister, eat her soup. The camera panned to show Aaron, his usual bravado completely absent, looking vulnerable and scared as he watched his sister. Garrett's mind raced. Who had taken this? How had they known to be there? The video continued, showing Garrett and Aaron's conversation, the momentary truce between them evident in their body language. As the video ended, Garrett's phone exploded with notifications. The clip was going viral, spreading through Brookside High's social media networks like wildfire. Comments ranged from shock at seeing Aaron's softer side to admiration for Garrett's kindness, but overwhelmingly, there was a sense of fascination, as if a curtain had been pulled back, revealing a hidden world. Garrett's heart sank. He had promised Aaron he wouldn't tell anyone about Lily. Even though he hadn't been the one to share this information, he felt a crushing sense of guilt. He tried calling Aaron, but the call went straight to voicemail. The rest of his shift passed in a blur of anxiety. By the time Garrett left the hospital, the video had taken on a life of its own. The memes were already circulating, screenshots annotated with snarky comments and wild speculations. The next morning, Garrett arrived at school to find the atmosphere charged with tension. Whispers followed him down the hallway, and he could feel the weight of stares on his back. But it was nothing compared to the reaction Aaron faced. Garrett spotted him at his locker, surrounded by his usual group of friends. But something was off. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by an awkward tension. As Garrett watched, one of the guys clapped Aaron on the shoulder, a little too hard to be friendly. "So, tough guy," the friend sneered, "got any other secret sob stories you've been hiding?" Aaron's face flushed red, a mix of embarrassment and anger. "Back off, Jake," he growled. But Jake wasn't done. I mean, who would have thought? Aaron the softie, spoon-feeding his little sis. It's almost sweet. His voice dripped with sarcasm. Before Aaron could respond, Garrett found himself stepping forward. "That's enough," he said firmly. Jake turned, surprise flickering across his face before it settled into a mocking grin. "Well, if it isn't the star of the show, come to defend your new bestie?" Garrett took a deep breath, keenly aware of the growing crowd around them. "This isn't about me or Aaron," he said, his voice steady. "This is about basic human decency. Would any of you act differently if it was your sister in that hospital bed?" A hush fell over the hallway. Jake opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to find a retort. Garrett continued, his words gaining strength. "We all have struggles we don't show the world. That doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. And maybe, just maybe, if we spent less time judging each other and more time supporting each other, this school would be a better place for everyone." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, CLA stepped forward to stand beside Garrett. Cody followed, then a few others. Even some of Aaron's friends shifted, moving away from Jake and closer to Aaron. The bell rang, breaking the spell. As students began to disperse, Garrett caught Aaron's eye. There was a mix of emotions there, anger, confusion, and something that might have been gratitude. But the moment was short-lived. As Garrett turned to head to class, he felt a hand grab his arm. It was Principal Hargrove, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Mr. Jacobs," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My office. Now." As Garrett followed the principal down the hallway, he could feel the eyes of the entire school on him. He had known there would be consequences for speaking out, for challenging the status quo, but he hadn't expected them to come so soon or so forcefully. In Principal Hargrove's office, Garrett found himself facing not just the principal, but also Mr. Worthington, the head of the school board. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. "Mr. Jacobs," Principal Hargrove began, his tone icy, "are you aware of the trouble you've caused with this video?" Garrett straightened his spine, meeting the principal's gaze steadily. "I didn't take or share that video, sir. But I stand by my actions in it and what I said in the hallway just now." Mr. Worthington leaned forward, his expensive suit crinkling. "Young man, you don't seem to understand the delicate balance we maintain at this school. Your actions, your words, they're disrupting that balance." "With all due respect, sir," Garrett replied, feeling a surge of courage. "Maybe that balance needs to be disrupted. There's real inequality at Brookside, real problems that aren't being addressed." The two men exchanged glances, a silent communication that sent a chill down Garrett's spine. "I'm afraid, Mr. Jacobs," Principal Hargrove said slowly, "that your continued presence at this school may no longer be tenable. We'll be contacting your parents to discuss your future at Brookside High." The words hit Garrett like a physical blow. Expulsion? He had known there might be consequences, but this. As he left the office, his mind reeling, Garrett found the hallway unexpectedly crowded. Word had spread fast, and students from all grades, all social groups, had gathered. There was CLA and Cody, of course, but also members of the debate team, the art club, even some of Aaron's friends. And there, at the edge of the crowd, was Aaron himself. Their eyes met, and Aaron gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. In that moment, Garrett realized that whatever happened next, he wouldn't be facing it alone. The battle for Brookside High was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And as Garrett looked at the faces of his fellow students, some supportive, some curious, some still wary, he knew that the real test of his convictions was yet to come. The video that had seemed like a disaster might just be the spark that ignited real change. But change never comes easy, and the forces aligned against Garrett were powerful. As he walked through the crowd, hearing whispers of support and seeing nods of encouragement, Garrett steeled himself for the fight ahead. Whatever the cost, he was determined to see this through, for himself, for his friends, and for every student at Brookside who had ever felt voiceless or overlooked. The road ahead would be hard, but standing there surrounded by his peers, Garrett felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could rewrite the story of Brookside High together. The news of Garrett's potential expulsion spread through Brookside High like wildfire. By lunchtime, the cafeteria was buzzing with heated discussions and whispered debates. Garrett sat with CLA and Cody, picking at his food, his mind still reeling from the morning's events. "They can't actually expel you, can they?" Cody asked, his voice tight with worry. "I mean, you didn't even do anything wrong." CLA nodded in agreement. "It's completely unfair. You were just standing up for what's right." Garrett sighed, pushing his tray away. "I don't know, guys." Principal Hargrove seemed pretty serious, and with Mr. Worthington involved, he trailed off, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. As they talked, Garrett noticed a commotion at the far end of the cafeteria. A group of students had gathered around someone, their voices rising in excitement. Curious, Garrett craned his neck to see what was happening. To his surprise, he saw Aaron standing on a table, his face flushed but determined. "Listen up, everyone." Aaron called out, his voice carrying across the now quiet room. "I've got something to say." The cafeteria fell silent, all eyes turning to Aaron. Garrett held his breath, unsure of what to expect. "You've all seen the video," Aaron began, his voice wavering slightly before steadying. "And yeah, that's my sister in the hospital. She's been sick for a long time and it's been hard." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I know I haven't always been the nicest guy. I've said and done things I'm not proud of. But Garrett, he helped my sister when he didn't have to. He didn't know who she was, he just saw someone who needed help, and he stepped up." Aaron's eyes found Garrett's across the room, and now they want to expel him for being a decent human being. For calling out the BS that goes on in this school every day. That's not right. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Aaron continued, his voice growing stronger. "We all know there are problems at Brookside. The way some students are treated differently because of where they live or how much money their parents have. The way some teachers write kids off before even giving them a chance. It's not fair, and it's not okay." Garrett watched in amazement as Aaron, the same guy who had tormented him for weeks, stood up for him and echoed the very concerns Garrett had been voicing. "I'm not saying Garrett's perfect," Aaron added with a wry smile. "God knows he's annoyed the hell out of me plenty of times. But he's trying to make things better for all of us. And if the school wants to punish him for that, then maybe we need to take a stand too." As Aaron finished speaking, the cafeteria erupted in applause and cheers. Students from all corners of the room stood up, voicing their support. Garrett felt overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of solidarity. In the midst of the chaos, Garrett's phone buzzed. It was a text from his father, "Coming to the school now. We need to talk." Garrett's heart sank. He had been so caught up in the events at school that he had almost forgotten about his parents' reaction. Supportive as his classmates were being, would it be enough to sway his father and the school administration? As he made his way to the principal's office, Garrett was surprised to find a crowd of students lining the hallway. They nodded to him as he passed, some reaching out to pat his shoulder or offer words of encouragement. It was a far cry from the isolation he had felt just weeks ago. Outside the office, Garrett took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He could hear raised voices inside, his father's deep baritone contrasting with Principal Hargrove's clipped tones. With a final glance at his supportive classmates, Garrett knocked and entered the room. The scene inside was tense. His father, Alexander Jacobs, stood tall and imposing, his tailored suit a stark contrast to Principal Hargrove's rumpled appearance. Mr. Worthington sat behind the desk, his face a mask of careful neutrality. "Ah, Garrett," Principal Hargrove said, his voice strained. "Please have a seat." As Garrett sat down, his father turned to him, his expression unreadable. "Son, I've been hearing some interesting things about your activities here at Brookside." Garrett swallowed hard, preparing to defend himself. But before he could speak, his father continued, "I have to say I'm surprised. And proud." The word hung in the air, so unexpected that for a moment Garrett wasn't sure he had heard correctly. "Proud?" he echoed. Alexander Jacobs nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You've been standing up for what you believe in, fighting for others, even when it puts you at risk. That takes courage, Garrett. The kind of courage your mother always had." The mention of his mother sent a jolt through Garrett. It had been so long since his father had spoken of her. Mr. Jacobs turned to face Principal Hargrove and Mr. Worthington, his expression hardening. "Now, gentlemen, I understand you've been considering expelling my son for his actions. I'd strongly advise against that course of action." Principal Hargrove sputtered, "Mr. Jacobs, you have to understand the disruption this has caused." "Disruption?" Alexander interrupted, his voice sharp. "From what I've seen and heard, my son has been addressing real issues that have been ignored for far too long. If anything, this school should be thanking him for bringing these problems to light." Mr. Worthington leaned forward, his tone conciliatory. "Mr. Jacobs, we appreciate your perspective, but there are complexities here that—" "Oh, I'm well aware of the complexities," Alexander cut in. "In fact, I've been doing some research of my own. Did you know that the disparities in resource allocation between students from different neighborhoods could be grounds for a civil rights investigation?" The color drained from Principal Hargrove's face. Mr. Worthington's carefully neutral expression slipped, revealing a flash of panic. Alexander continued, his voice level but filled with underlying steel. "Gentlemen, I suggest we look at this situation not as a problem to be silenced, but as an opportunity to make real, positive changes at Brookside High. Changes that are long overdue." As the adults continued to talk, hammering out the beginnings of a plan to address the inequalities at Brookside, Garrett sat in stunned silence. He had never seen this side of his father before, the passionate advocate, the man willing to stand up against injustice. When the meeting finally ended, Garrett and his father walked out of the office together. The hallway was still lined with students, waiting to hear the outcome. As whispers spread that Garrett wouldn't be expelled, cheers erupted. In the midst of the celebration, Garrett turned to his father. "Dad, I thank you. I didn't expect." Alexander placed a hand on Garrett's shoulder, his eyes shining with an emotion Garrett couldn't quite name. "But you reminded me of something important today, son. Something your mother always believed in, that one person really can make a difference." As they made their way through the crowd of jubilant students, Garrett felt a sense of hope and possibility that he hadn't experienced in years. The battle for equality at Brookside was far from over, but for the first time it felt like real change was within reach. And more than that, Garrett felt like he had finally found his place, not just at Brookside but in his own family. As he caught sight of CLA Cody and even Aaron waiting for him at the end of the hall, Garrett realized that he had found something he had been searching for all along, a sense of purpose and a community to share it with. The road ahead would still be challenging, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But looking at the faces of his friends, his classmates, and his father, Garrett knew that whatever came next, he wouldn't be facing it alone. Together, they had the power to reshape Brookside High and perhaps even the world beyond its walls. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of a day that had changed everything, Garrett stepped forward into a future bright with possibility, ready to continue the fight for justice and equality, one small act of kindness at a time. In the weeks that followed, Brookside High underwent a transformation that few could have predicted. The threat of expulsion had turned into an opportunity for real change, and Garrett found himself at the center of it all. The school board, under pressure from both students and parents, established a task force to address the inequalities at Brookside. To everyone's surprise, they invited Garrett to be a part of it. Alongside him was CLA, representing the student council, Aaron, whose unexpected support had turned the tide, and a mix of teachers, administrators, and community members. Their first meeting was tense, filled with uncomfortable silences and barely concealed skepticism. But as Garrett shared his experiences and the stories he'd gathered from other students, the mood began to shift. And even the most resistant members of the task force couldn't deny the reality of the situation when faced with concrete examples and data. "It's not just about resources," Garrett explained, his voice steady as he addressed the group. "And it's about expectations and opportunities. When a teacher tells a student not to bother applying to top colleges because of where they live, that's not just discouraging, it's actively harmful." CLA chimed in, presenting a survey she'd conducted among students. Over 70% of students from the South Side reported feeling that teachers had lower expectations for them compared to their North Side peers, she said, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a serious, determined expression. The task force meetings became a regular part of Garrett's routine, squeezing in between classes his hospital volunteering and the informal student support group that had continued to grow. But it was exhausting, but Garrett felt more alive than he had in years. At home, things were changing too. His father, true to his word in the principal's office, had become more present and engaged. They started having dinner together most nights, talking about Garrett's day and the progress at school. Sometimes they even shared memories of his mother, her passion for justice and equality shining through in the stories Alexander told. One evening, as they cleared the dinner table, Alexander paused, a wistful smile on his face. "You know, Garrett, your mother would be so proud of you. She always believed in fighting for what's right, no matter the cost." Garrett felt a lump form in his throat. "I wish she could see this," he said softly. Alexander squeezed his son's shoulder. "She can, in a way. Through you. You're carrying on her legacy, son." The changes at Brookside weren't without challenges. Some teachers resisted the new initiatives, clinging to old biases and practices. A vocal minority of parents complained about lowering standards when advanced classes were opened up to more students, based on aptitude rather than zip code. But for every setback, there seemed to be 2 steps forward. Garrett watched with pride as Cody, who had once been discouraged from even trying, was accepted into a prestigious summer program for aspiring engineers. He saw Southside students joining clubs and teams they had previously felt excluded from, bringing fresh perspectives and talents. Perhaps the most surprising development was Garrett's evolving relationship with Erin. What had started as a grudging truce grew into a genuine friendship. They often found themselves working late on task force proposals, their different backgrounds and experiences combining to create innovative solutions. "You know," Erin said one night as they were leaving the school, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you came to Brookside, Garrett. You've changed things around here. You've changed me." Garrett smiled, remembering their initial animosity. "We've all changed, Erin. That's what growth is all about." As the school year drew to a close, the task force prepared to present their recommendations to the school board and the wider community. The night before the presentation, Garrett couldn't sleep. He found himself wandering down to the kitchen, only to find his father already there, 2 mugs of hot chocolate waiting. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Alexander asked, sliding 1 mug towards Garrett. Garrett nodded, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "What if it's not enough? What if we can't convince them?" Alexander leaned back, considering his words carefully. "Garrett, change, real, lasting change, doesn't happen overnight. What you and your friends have started here, it's just the beginning. There will be setbacks, moments when it feels like you're not making any progress. But every small victory, every mind you change, every life you impact, that's what matters." As Garrett sipped his hot chocolate, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. His father was right. This wasn't the end of the journey, it was just the beginning. The next day, as Garrett stood before the packed auditorium, students, teachers, parents, and community members all waiting to hear the task force's proposals, he felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. He caught sight of CLA and Cody in the front row, giving him encouraging thumbs up. Aaron stood beside him on the stage, ready to present his part of the plan. Taking a deep breath, Garrett began to speak. "A few months ago, I stood in this same auditorium and talked about the inequalities at Brookside High. Today we're here to talk about solutions. Real, concrete steps we can take to make our school a place where every student has the opportunity to thrive." As he spoke, Garrett could feel the energy in the room shifting. There were nods of agreement, murmurs of approval. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. In that moment, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all united in the hope for a better future, Garrett realized something profound. The journey he had begun on that first day at Brookside, driven by a desire to escape his own privilege and make a difference, had become something much bigger than himself. It had become a movement, a collective effort to create change not just in one school, but in the entire community. And as Garrett stepped back to let the next speaker take the podium, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The story of Brookside High was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. But with every small act of kindness, every challenge to the status quo, every voice raised in support of equality. They were writing a new chapter, one of hope, growth, and the power of unity in the face of adversity. As Garrett took his seat, he caught his father's eye in the audience. Alexander gave him a proud smile and a subtle nod, a gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, Garrett felt a connection not just to his present and future, but to his past, to the mother he had lost, whose spirit of justice lived on through him. The road ahead would be long, but looking around at the faces of his friends, his classmates, his community, Garrett knew that together they could overcome any obstacle. The story of Brookside High, their story, was just beginning, and the possibilities were endless. If you've been moved by Garrett's journey and the transformation at Brookside High, we'd love to hear from you. So leave a comment with the number 1 to let us know you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more inspiring tales of change and personal growth. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you stories that matter. As the summer sun beat down on Brookside, the echoes of change reverberated through the community. The task force's recommendations had been met with overwhelming approval, and the school board had pledged to implement a series of reforms over the coming year. But for Garrett and his friends, the work was far from over. With school out for the summer, they turned their attention to the wider community. The inequalities they had uncovered at Brookside were, after all, just symptoms of larger systemic issues. Garrett, CLA, Cody, and Aaron found themselves diving headfirst into community organizing, determined to keep the momentum going. Their first project was a series of town hall meetings designed to bring together residents from both sides of Brookside to discuss the challenges facing their community. The first meeting was tense, with old prejudices and resentments bubbling to the surface. But as people began to share their stories of struggle, of hope, of shared dreams for their children, the atmosphere slowly began to change. "I never realized," one Northside resident admitted, her voice thick with emotion, "that families on the South Side were dealing with so much. We're all just trying to give our kids the best chance we can." It was moments like these that kept Garrett going, even when the work felt overwhelming. Every mind changed, every connection made, felt like a step towards the future they were fighting for. As the summer progressed, their initiatives expanded. Cody spearheaded a mentorship program, pairing high school students with younger kids from underprivileged backgrounds. CLA organized a series of workshops on college applications and financial aid, open to all students but with a focus on reaching those who might not have access to such resources at home. Aaron, much to everyone's surprise, turned out to have a knack for fundraising. He used his connections in the Northside community to secure donations for after-school programs and resources for students in need. "It's the least I can do," he said when Garrett expressed amazement at his dedication. "I've got a lot to make up for." Garrett found himself splitting his time between various projects, from volunteering at the hospital to helping organize a community cleanup day that brought together residents from all parts of town. It was exhausting work, but deeply fulfilling. One sweltering afternoon, as Garrett and his friends were taking a well-deserved break in the park, CLA broached a subject they'd all been avoiding. "So," she said, twirling a blade of grass between her fingers, "senior year's coming up. Have you guys thought about what comes after?" A heavy silence fell over the group. They'd been so focused on their work in the community that the future beyond high school seemed almost unreal. Cody was the first to speak up. "I've been looking at engineering programs," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "That summer program really opened my eyes to what's possible." Aaron nodded. "That's great, man. I've been thinking about pre-law, actually. Figure if we want to change the system, might as well learn how it works from the inside." CLA beamed. "Journalism for me. Someone's got to tell these stories, right?" They all turned to Garrett, who had remained quiet. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their expectations. I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "Part of me wants to stay here to keep working on what we've started. But another part wants to see what else is out there." CLA finished for him, her expression understanding. Garrett nodded, relieved that she understood. Yeah, I feel like there's so much more to learn, so many other communities facing similar challenges. But the thought of leaving Brookside, leaving all of this, he gestured around at their friends, at the town they'd worked so hard to change. Aaron clapped him on the shoulder. Whatever you decide, man, you know we've got your back. This thing we've started, it's bigger than any one of us now. As the conversation flowed around him, Garrett found his mind wandering to the future. He thought about his mother, about the legacy she'd left behind. He thought about his father, and the unexpected bond they'd forged over the past year. And he thought about Brookside, not just the school, but the entire community that had become so much more than just a place to live. Later that evening, as Garrett sat on the porch swing at home, his father joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "You've got a big decision ahead of you," Alexander said finally, his voice gentle. Garrett nodded, not surprised that his father had sensed his inner turmoil. "I don't know what to do, Dad. There's so much more work to be done here, but the world is big and you want to see more of it," Alexander finished. He smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Your mother was the same way. She believed that to really make a difference, you had to expand your horizons, learn from different people and places." Garrett looked at his father, surprised. "I didn't know that about her." Alexander nodded. "She traveled a lot before we settled down here. Said it gave her perspective, made her a better advocate for change." He turned to face Garrett fully. "Son, whatever you decide, know that I'm proud of you. And know that the work you've done here, the changes you've sparked, they won't disappear just because you go off to college." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Garrett felt a sense of peace settle over him. The decision about his future was still looming, but somehow it didn't seem quite as daunting anymore. The summer continued, a whirlwind of activity and change. Garrett and his friends threw themselves into their work with renewed vigor, knowing that their time together might be limited. They organized a back-to-school drive that provided supplies for hundreds of students in need, set up a community garden in a previously neglected lot, and even managed to convince the town council to allocate funds for a youth center that would serve all of Brookside. As August drew to a close and the new school year loomed, Garrett found himself standing once again at the entrance to Brookside High. But this time, instead of nervousness, he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. The building looked the same, but Garrett knew that inside, things were different. New programs were in place, teachers had undergone sensitivity training, and students from all backgrounds were being encouraged to reach for their full potential. As he watched the stream of students entering the building, friends greeting each other, nervous freshmen looking around in awe, seniors striding in with confidence, Garrett realized something profound. The story of Brookside wasn't just about him, or even about his group of friends. It was about an entire community coming together to create change. Whatever the future held, whether he stayed close to home or ventured out into the wider world, Garrett knew that the lessons he'd learned at Brookside would stay with him forever. The power of kindness, the importance of standing up for what's right, the strength found in unity, these were gifts he would carry with him always. As the bell rang, signaling the start of a new year full of possibilities, Garrett took a deep breath and stepped forward. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning, but with the support of his friends, his family, and an entire community behind him, Garrett felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The story of Brookside High and of Garrett Jacobs was far from over. But one thing was certain, it was a story of hope, of transformation, and of the incredible power of individuals coming together to create lasting change. As the leaves began to turn and the crisp autumn air settled over Brookside, Garrett found himself facing a new set of challenges. The reforms at the high school were well underway, but as with any significant change, there were growing pains. One chilly morning, Garrett arrived at school to find a small group of protesters gathered outside the main entrance. They were mostly parents from the north side, holding signs that read "Maintain our standards and quality education, not quarters." Garrett's heart sank as he approached. He had known there would be resistance to the changes, but seeing it so blatantly was displayed was disheartening. "Garrett," CLA called out, jogging up to him. Her face was flushed with a mix of anger and determination. "Can you believe this?" Before Garrett could respond, one of the protesters, a middle-aged woman with perfectly coiffed hair, stepped forward. "Hey, you must be Garrett Jacobs," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The boy who thinks he can social engineer our school." Garrett took a deep breath, remembering the conflict resolution techniques they'd practiced in the task force meetings. "Ma'am, I understand you have concerns. Would you be willing to discuss them? I'd love to hear your perspective." The woman seemed taken aback by his calm response. She hesitated for a moment before nodding curtly. "Fine, let's talk." As Garrett engaged in conversation with the protesters, more students began to arrive. Some looked confused, others angry. Aaron and Cody pushed through the crowd to join Garrett and CLA. "What's going on?" Cody asked, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. "Looks like we've got some explaining to do," Aaron muttered, his jaw set in determination. For the next hour, Garrett and his friends talked with the protesters, listening to their concerns and addressing them as best they could. It wasn't easy. Years of ingrained beliefs and fears didn't disappear in a single conversation. So by the time the first bell rang, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. "I still don't agree with everything you're doing," the woman who had first approached Garrett said, "but I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Maybe we could set up a meeting with the task force to discuss this further." Garrett nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I think that's a great idea. Thank you for being open to dialogue." As the protesters dispersed and students filed into the school, Principal Hargrove approached Garrett and his friends. His face was a mix of concern and admiration. "That was quite impressive, Mr. Jacobs," he said. "I must admit, when I saw the protesters, I feared the worst. But you handled it with remarkable maturity." Garrett shrugged, feeling slightly embarrassed by the praise. "We're all part of this community, sir. The only way forward is through understanding and cooperation." Principal Hargrove nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed. Well, I believe you've all missed first period, but under the circumstances, I think we can excuse that. Carry on." As they walked to their next class, CLA nudged Garrett playfully. "Look at you, Mr. Diplomat. Who would have thought the new kid would end up teaching us all about community building?" Garrett chuckled, but there was a hint of melancholy in his smile. "I just wish it was always this easy. One conversation doesn't fix everything." "No," Aaron agreed, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "But it's a start, and that's something." The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes and conversations. News of the morning's events had spread quickly, and Garrett found himself fielding questions and concerns from students and teachers alike. It was exhausting but exhilarating at the same time. That evening, as Garrett sat at his desk trying to focus on homework, his phone buzzed with a news alert. His heart skipped a beat as he read the headline, "Local Teens Education Reform Efforts Gain National Attention." The article detailed the changes at Brookside High and the broader community initiatives Garrett and his friends had spearheaded. It was largely positive, praising their efforts to address systemic inequalities. But it also mentioned the morning's protest and hinted at the challenges still to come. As Garrett read, he felt a mix of pride and trepidation. The national attention was validating, but it also raised the stakes. Eyes were on Brookside now, watching to see if their experiment in educational equity would succeed or fail. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. His father entered, holding a tablet with the same article pulled up. "Quite a write-up," Alexander said, sitting on the edge of Garrett's bed. "How are you feeling about all this?" Garrett sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It's amazing to see our work recognized, but it also feels like the pressure's really on now. What if we can't live up to expectations?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. "Garrett, do you remember what I told you the night before you presented the task force's recommendations?" Garrett nodded. You said that real change doesn't happen overnight. Exactly, Alexander smiled. This article, the national attention, it's just one more step in the journey. There will be setbacks and challenges, but what matters is that you keep moving forward. And as his father spoke, Garrett felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. He was right. This wasn't the end goal, it was just another part of the process. Thanks, Dad, Garrett said softly. I'm really glad you're here for all this. Alexander's eyes misted slightly. I'm just sorry it took me so long to really be present. Your mother would be so proud of you, Garrett. I hope you know that. As his father left the room, Garrett turned back to his computer. Instead of returning to his homework, he opened a new document and began to type. And if people were going to be watching Bookside, then maybe it was time to share their story more widely. He worked late into the night, pouring out his experiences, the challenges they'd faced, and the lessons they'd learned. It wasn't a polished piece, but it was honest and heartfelt. Just before midnight, Garrett's phone buzzed again. It was a group text from CLA. Emergency meeting tomorrow before school. Student council wants to talk about the article and next steps. You in? Garrett smiled as he typed his reply, absolutely. See you in the morning. As he finally crawled into bed, exhausted but energized, Garrett realized something. The story of Bookside High wasn't just about education reform anymore. It had become a testament to the power of youth activism, to the possibility of bridging divides and creating real, lasting change. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and he knew there would be many, Garrett felt ready to face them. With his friends by his side and a community rallying behind them, anything seemed possible. The autumn wind whistled outside his window, carrying with it the promise of change and the excitement of new beginnings. As Garrett drifted off to sleep, he couldn't help but feel that they were on the brink of something truly transformative. The real work was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead. As winter descended on Bookside, bringing with it a blanket of snow and a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the town, Garrett and his friends found themselves facing their most significant challenge yet. The national attention brought by the news article had been a double-edged sword. While it had brought support and resources from unexpected quarters, it had also intensified the scrutiny on their efforts. Every success was celebrated, but every setback was magnified tenfold. One frosty morning, Garrett arrived at school to find CLA waiting for him at the entrance, her face tight with worry. "We've got a problem," she said without preamble. "The school board is meeting tonight to discuss concerns about the new programs." Garrett felt his stomach drop. What kind of concerns? CLA handed him a printout of an email she'd received from her contact on the board. Some of the North Side parents are claiming that the new inclusive policies are bringing down the overall academic performance of the school. They're pushing for a return to the old tracking system. As they walked to their first class, Garrett's mind raced. They had anticipated resistance, but this felt like a direct threat to everything they'd worked for. "We need to mobilize," he said, pulling out his phone to send a group text to their core team. "Emergency meeting at lunch." The day passed in a blur of whispered conversations and hurried planning between classes. By lunchtime, a sizable group had gathered in an empty classroom, faces grim but determined. "All right," Garrett began, looking around at the assembled students. "We all know what's at stake here. If the school board decides to roll back these changes, it's not just about Bookside High anymore. It could set a precedent for other schools facing similar challenges." Aaron, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. "My dad's on the board," he said, his voice low. "He told me last night that there's a lot of pressure from some of the wealthier families. They're threatening to pull their kids out of Bookside if things don't change back." A murmur of anger rippled through the room. Cody slammed his hand on a desk. "That's not fair. We've only just started to see real progress. How can they judge so quickly?" "They're scared," CLA said, her tone thoughtful. "Change is hard, and they're worried about their own kids' futures. We need to show them that this new system benefits everyone, not just the students from the South Side." Garrett nodded, feeling a spark of inspiration. "You're right, KLA. We need to change the narrative. This isn't about taking opportunities away from some students to give to others. It's about creating a better learning environment for everyone." For the next hour, they brainstormed furiously. Ideas flew back and forth, testimonials from students who had benefited from the new programs, data showing overall improvements in academic performance, proposals for addressing the concerns of worried parents without compromising their core mission. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Garrett felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Okay, team," he said, standing up. "We've got our work cut out for us. Let's split up the tasks and meet back here after school to finalize our presentation for the board meeting." The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of activity. Garrett and his friends worked tirelessly, gathering statistics, preparing speeches, and rallying support from other students and sympathetic teachers. As the hour of the board meeting approached, they gathered once more to review their strategy. "Remember," Garrett said, looking each of his friends in the eye, "no matter what happens in there, we've already accomplished so much. We've started a conversation that can't be silenced. We've shown what's possible when a community comes together. Whatever the board decides, that doesn't change." They nodded, drawing strength from his words and from each other. As they walked towards the school auditorium, where the meeting was being held, Garrett felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see his father standing there, a proud smile on his face. "I thought you could use some extra support," Alexander said. "I've been making some calls. There are people here tonight who want to hear what you have to say." Garrett felt a lump form in his throat. "Thanks, Dad," he managed, before being swept into the auditorium by the crowd of students, parents, and community members flooding in. The meeting was tense from the start. Board members shifted uncomfortably as they faced the packed room. Garrett could see the lines drawn: clearly affluent North Side parents on one side, South Side families and students on the other, with a small but vocal group of supporters from both sides scattered throughout. As the board chair called the meeting to order, Garrett took a deep breath. This was it, the moment they'd been working towards for months. He stood up, feeling the eyes of the entire room on him. "Members of the board, fellow students, parents, and community members," he began, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "We're here tonight because Brookside High is at a crossroads. The changes we've implemented over the past year have been challenging, I won't deny that. But they've also been transformative." For the next 20 minutes, Garrett and his friends presented their case. They shared stories of students whose lives had been changed by the new programs, data showing improvements in overall academic performance, and testimonials from teachers who had seen a renewed engagement in their classrooms. CLA spoke passionately about the importance of diverse perspectives in education. Cody presented a detailed analysis of how the new system was actually better preparing all students for the challenges of college and the workforce. Darren, in a move that visibly shocked his father, stood up and spoke about how his own prejudices had been challenged and changed through this process. As they concluded their presentation, the room erupted in applause. Even some of the skeptical board members looked thoughtful, but Garrett knew the battle wasn't over yet. The board opened the floor for public comments, and for the next 2 hours, they listened as community members voiced their opinions. There were heated arguments and emotional pleas on both sides. Through it all, Garrett and his friends sat quietly, responding respectfully when addressed, but otherwise letting the community have its say. Finally, as the clock ticked past midnight, the board chair called for a vote. The tension in the room was palpable as each member cast their ballot. Garrett held his breath, feeling CLA's hand gripping as tightly. By a vote of 4-3, the chair announced, her voice echoing in the silent room, the board has decided to continue with the current programs, with a full review to be conducted at the end of the school year. The auditorium exploded in a mix of cheers and disappointed murmurs. Garrett felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew this wasn't an outright victory. They had bought time, nothing more. As the crowd began to disperse, Garrett found himself surrounded by his friends, all talking excitedly at once. But over their shoulders he caught sight of a group of Northside parents, their faces a mix of anger and fear. This fight was far from over. Later that night, as Garrett lay in bed replaying the events of the evening, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a simple message, but one that sent a chill down his spine. "This isn't over, Jacobs. You can't change the way things are meant to be." Garrett stared at the screen, a mix of determination and apprehension settling in his gut. They had won a battle, but the war for the soul of Brookside High, and perhaps for the future of education itself, was just beginning. As he drifted off to sleep, Garrett knew that the real challenges lay ahead, but with his friends by his side and a community rallying behind them, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The winter wind howled outside, a reminder of the storms yet to come, but inside Garrett felt a warmth that no chill could touch, the warmth of purpose, of friendship, and the knowledge that they were fighting for something truly important. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities to create lasting change. And Garrett was ready for it all. As the winter frost gave way to the first tentative blooms of spring, Garrett found himself grappling with a new and unexpected challenge. The anonymous text he had received on the night of the school board meeting wasn't an isolated incident. Over the past few months, a series of subtle threats and acts of vandalism had plagued the school, creating an atmosphere of tension and fear. One crisp morning, Garrett arrived at Brookside High to find the main entrance plastered with flyers. Bold red letters screamed, "Restore our school's legacy in equality excellence." His heart sank as he saw students crowding around, whispering and pointing. "This is getting out of hand," CLA said, appearing at his side and ripping down one of the flyers. Her face was a mix of anger and concern. "We need to do something, Garrett. People are scared." Garrett nodded, his mind racing. "Call an emergency meeting. Library lunch period. Spread the word, but keep it quiet. We need to be smart about this." As he made his way through the school, Garrett couldn't help but notice the changed atmosphere. Students who had once been vocal supporters of the reforms now walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Even some of the teachers seemed hesitant to engage, their smiles strained and conversations clipped. The anonymous threats had done their job, sowing seeds of doubt and fear throughout the Brookside community. Garrett felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders. They had come so far, fought so hard. How could they let it all slip away now? When lunchtime arrived, Garrett was surprised to see not just their core group, but dozens of students packed into the library's study room. Faces both familiar and new looked to him expectantly, a mix of determination and apprehension in their eyes. "Thanks for coming," Garrett began, his voice low but firm. "I know everyone's worried about what's been happening. The threats, the vandalism, the fear-mongering, it's not okay, and we're not going to stand for it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Cody stepped forward, his usually cheerful face serious. "We've been compiling evidence," he said, holding up a thick folder. "Every incident, every threat. We're building a case." "But it's not just about catching the perpetrators," CLA added. "We need to address the root of the problem. The fear and misinformation that's driving this backlash." Aaron, who had been uncharacteristically quiet lately, spoke up. "My dad, he's been getting pressure from some of his old friends. They're talking about starting a private school, taking their kids and their money out of Brookside altogether." A tense silence fell over the room. The implications were clear. If the wealthy families pulled out, the school's funding and resources would take a massive hit. It could undo everything they had worked for. Garrett felt all eyes turn to him. He took a deep breath, centering himself. "This was never going to be easy," he said, his voice gaining strength. "Change, real, lasting change, is always met with resistance, but we can't let fear win. We've come too far to back down now." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his fellow students. "We need to go on the offensive, not with threats or violence, but with truth, with compassion, with the power of our united voices." For the next hour, they brainstormed and planned. Ideas flew back and forth. A town hall meeting to address concerns and dispel myths. A social media campaign showcasing the positive changes at Brookside. One-on-one outreach to families considering leaving the district. As the meeting wound down, Garrett felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had a plan, a direction. But as the students filed out, a nagging worry lingered in the back of his mind. But would it be enough? That evening, as Garrett sat at his desk working on the outline for their social media campaign, his father knocked on the door. Alexander's face was grave as he entered the room. "Garrett, we need to talk," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I received a call today from an old business associate. He offered to pull some strings, get you into Westfield Prep. Full scholarship." Garrett felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. Westfield Prep was one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. Under normal circumstances, it would be an incredible opportunity. But now, "It's a generous offer," Alexander continued, his voice careful. "You've done so much already, son. Maybe it's time to think about your own future." Garrett stared at his father, a whirlwind of emotions churning inside him. Part of him was tempted to leave behind the stress, the threats, the constant battle, to have a fresh start at a school where he could focus on his own education, his own goals. But then he thought of CLA's determined face as she ripped down those hateful flyers. Of Cody's proud smile when he aced a test in a class he never thought he'd be allowed to take. Of Aaron standing up to his own father to fight for what was right. "Dad," Garrett said slowly, his voice thick with emotion, "I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I can't leave Brookside. Not now. What we're doing there, it's bigger than just me. It's about changing a broken system, about giving everyone a fair shot. I need to see this through." Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then, to Garrett's surprise, a smile spread across his face. "I had a feeling you'd say that," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Your mother would be so proud of the man you're becoming, Garrett. And so am I." As his father left the room, Garrett turned back to his computer with renewed determination. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges he couldn't even imagine yet. But he knew, deep in his heart, that it was a road worth traveling. Outside, the spring rain tapped gently against his window, washing away the last remnants of winter. In that quiet moment, Garrett felt a profound sense of clarity. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. Not just for himself, but for every student at Brookside who deserved a chance to reach their full potential. The battle for the soul of Brookside High was far from over, but with every challenge they faced, with every small victory they achieved, Garrett and his friends were proving that change was possible. That a group of determined young people could stand up to injustice and make a real difference in their community. As he worked late into the night, planning and strategizing, Garrett felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. They had overcome so much already. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. The story of Brookside High, their story, was still being written, and Garrett was determined to make it a story of triumph, of perseverance, and of the incredible power of unity in the face of adversity. As spring bloomed in full force, bringing with it a sense of renewal and hope, Brookside High found itself at the center of a perfect storm. The tension that had been building over the past months finally reached its boiling point, catalyzed by an unexpected event that would test Garrett and his friends in ways they never imagined. It started on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Garrett was walking to school, deep in thought about their upcoming town hall meeting, when he noticed an unusual commotion at the school's entrance. A crowd had gathered, their voices a mix of shock and anger. As he pushed his way through, his heart sank at the sight before him. The school's facade had been vandalized overnight. Crude graffiti covered the walls, with messages ranging from thinly veiled threats to outright hate speech. But what caught Garrett's eye was a large, crudely painted portrait, unmistakably meant to be him, with the words "traitor to Huey's class" scrawled beneath it. Garrett. CLA's voice cut through the noise as she rushed to his side. "Are you okay? This is horrible." Before Garrett could respond, Principal Hargrove's voice boomed over the crowd. "Everyone, please return to your classrooms immediately. This situation will be dealt with." As the students reluctantly dispersed, Garrett felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Aaron, his face a mask of anger and determination. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice low. "We need to do something. Now." The day passed in a blur of whispered conversations and tense silences. The vandalism had shaken everyone, even those who had been skeptical of the changes at Brookside. By lunchtime, Garrett and his core group had managed to gather in an empty classroom, joined by a larger group of concerned students than ever before. "All right," Garrett began, his voice steady despite the turmoil he felt inside. "I know we're all upset about what happened, but we can't let this derail everything we've worked for. In fact, we need to use this as a catalyst for change." The CLA nodded, her eyes blazing with determination. "Garrett's right. This isn't just about our school anymore. It's about standing up to hate and prejudice wherever we see it." For the next hour, they brainstormed and debated, formulating a plan that was both bold and risky. They would turn the upcoming town hall meeting into a rally, not just for Brookside High, but for the entire community. It would be a chance to address the fears and misconceptions head-on, to showcase the positive changes they'd made, and to call for unity in the face of division. As they finalized their plans, Garrett felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This could be the turning point they'd been waiting for, or it could backfire spectacularly. But they were out of options. It was time to take a stand. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Garrett and his friends worked tirelessly, reaching out to community leaders, preparing speeches and organizing logistics. They faced resistance at every turn, from skeptical administrators, worried parents, and their own doubts and fears. So the night before the rally, Garrett found himself unable to sleep. He slipped out of the house and walked to the nearby park, hoping the fresh air would clear his head. To his surprise, he found CLA already there, sitting on a swing and staring up at the stars. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" she said as he approached. Garrett shook his head, taking the swing next to her. For a moment they sat in companionable silence, the only sound the gentle creaking of the swing chains. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Garrett asked finally, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at him. "If maybe we're pushing too hard, too fast?" CLA was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I think about all the kids at Brookside who finally have a chance to reach their full potential. About the conversations we've started, the minds we've changed. And I know that no matter what happens tomorrow, we've already made a difference." Garrett felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. CLA had been his rock through all of this, her unwavering belief in their cause a constant source of strength. "You're right," he said softly. "Whatever happens, we've come too far to back down now." As they walked home, a plan began to form in Garrett's mind. He stayed up late into the night, making calls and sending messages, setting things in motion for the rally. The next day dawned bright and clear, as if the weather itself was offering its support. As Garrett arrived at the community center where the rally was to be held, he was stunned by the turnout. The parking lot was full, and a line stretched around the block. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Students, parents, teachers, and community members from all walks of life filled the auditorium. Garrett could see the divide, supporters on one side, skeptics on the other, but there was also a palpable sense of curiosity, of willingness to listen. As Garrett took the stage, he felt a moment of panic, but then he saw his friends in the front row, their faces full of encouragement. He saw his father standing at the back, a proud smile on his face, and he knew what he had to do. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "We're here tonight because Brookside High and our entire community is at a crossroads. We've seen incredible progress over the past year, but we've also faced significant challenges. The vandalism at the school last week was a stark reminder of how far we still have to go." He paused, looking out over the crowd. "But I'm not here to talk about hate. I'm here to talk about hope, about the power of unity in the face of division, about the incredible things we can achieve when we come together as a community." For the next hour, Garrett and his friends presented their case. They shared stories of students whose lives had been transformed by the new programs at Brookside. They presented data showing improvements in academic performance across all demographics, and they addressed the fears and concerns of those who opposed the changes, offering solutions and compromises. But the real surprise came at the end of the rally. Garrett invited to the stage a group of unexpected allies, business leaders from both sides of town, who announced a new initiative to provide internships and job training programs for Brookside students. It was a powerful demonstration of what could be achieved when the entire community came together. As the rally ended and the crowd began to disperse, Garrett felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had made their case, not just with words, but with concrete actions and community support. It wasn't a complete victory. There were still skeptics, still challenges to face, but it was a significant step forward. In the days that followed, Garrett and his friends watched as their efforts began to bear fruit. The backlash against the school reforms began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of pride in what Brookside was achieving. More parents got involved, volunteering their time and resources. Even some of the staunchest opponents began to come around, seeing the positive impact on their own children. As the school year drew to a close, Garrett found himself reflecting on the incredible journey they had been on. They had faced hatred, overcome obstacles, and forged unlikely alliances. But most importantly, they had shown what was possible when a community came together to fight for change. The story of Brookside High was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more battles to fight. But as Garrett looked around at his friends at the school they had transformed, he felt a profound sense of hope for the future. They had started something powerful, something that would continue long after they had graduated. And as for Garrett himself, he had found his calling. The fight for educational equity and social justice was just beginning, and he was ready to take it beyond the walls of Brookside High. The world was waiting, full of challenges to overcome and changes to be made, and Garrett Jacobs was ready to face them all, armed with the lessons he had learned and the unwavering support of his community. The sun set on Brookside, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of so many more. And Garrett couldn't wait to see what the future would bring. As the final days of senior year approached, Brookside High buzzed with a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. For Garrett and his friends, it was a time of reflection on all they had accomplished and anticipation for the challenges that lay ahead. The school had undergone a remarkable transformation over the past year. The once stark divide between North and South Side students had blurred, replaced by a sense of unity and shared purpose. The internship program announced at the rally had been a resounding success, with students from all backgrounds gaining valuable experience and connections in various industries. On a warm spring afternoon, Garrett found himself wandering the halls of Brookside, taking in the changes. Colorful murals now adorned the walls, depicting scenes of diversity, unity, and hope, a far cry from the sterile environment he had first encountered. As he passed the library, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of a study group that included students from all walks of life, working together and supporting each other. "Quite a change, isn't it?" a voice said behind him. Garrett turned to find Principal Hargrove, a wistful smile on his face. "It really is, sir," Garrett replied. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how far we've come." Principal Hargrove nodded, his eyes scanning the hallway. "You know, Garrett, when you first came to Brookside, I thought you were going to be nothing but trouble." He chuckled softly. "I've never been so glad to be proven wrong." As they walked together, the principal shared some exciting news. The success of Brookside's reforms had caught the attention of educators across the state. Other schools were beginning to implement similar programs using Brookside as a model. "You and your friends have started something truly remarkable," Principal Hargrove said, his voice filled with pride. "Something that's going to impact students for years to come." The conversation left Garrett feeling both elated and humbled. They had set out to change their school, but the ripple effects were spreading far beyond what they had ever imagined. As graduation day approached, Garrett and his core group of friends, CLA, Cody and Aaron, decided to have one last meeting in their favorite spot, the old oak tree behind the school. It was a bittersweet gathering, filled with laughter, tears, and reminiscing about the year that had changed everything. "I still can't believe we pulled it off," Cody said, shaking his head in amazement. "Remember when we first started? It seemed impossible." CLA nodded, a fierce pride in her eyes. "But we did it. We really did it." Aaron, who had undergone perhaps the most profound transformation of them all, spoke up. "You know, I owe you guys an apology. Especially you, Garrett. I was such a jerk when you first came here." Garrett smiled, clapping Aaron on the shoulder. "Water under the bridge, man. We've all grown a lot this year." As they talked, the conversation turned to their plans for the future. CLA had been accepted to a prestigious journalism program, determined to continue telling stories that mattered. Cody was headed to MIT on a full scholarship, his dreams of becoming an engineer finally within reach. Aaron, in a move that had shocked everyone, had decided to take a gap year to work with a non-profit focused on educational equity. When it came to Garrett, he hesitated for a moment before sharing his news. "I've been offered an internship with the Department of Education," he said quietly. "They want me to help develop programs to implement some of the reforms we started here at Brookside on a national level." His friends erupted in cheers and congratulations, but Garrett held up a hand. "There's more," he continued. "I've also been thinking, what if we started our own organization? Something to help other students do what we did here at Brookside." The idea was met with enthusiastic nods and a flurry of suggestions. By the time they left their meeting, the seeds of a new project had been planted, one that would allow them to continue working together even as they pursued their individual paths. Graduation day arrived in a flurry of caps, gowns, and teary-eyed parents. As Garrett stood at the podium to deliver his valedictory speech, he looked out over the sea of faces, students, teachers, family members, and community leaders. He saw the pride in his father's eyes, felt the spirit of his mother watching over him, and drew strength from the supportive smiles of his friends. "When I came to Brookside High," Garrett began, his voice strong and clear, "I thought I was just trying to escape my privileged background, to find a place where I could make a difference. What I found instead was a community, a family, and a cause worth fighting for." He spoke of the challenges they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, and the changes they had achieved. But more than that, he spoke of the lessons they had learned, about unity, perseverance, and the power of standing up for what's right. "As we leave Brookside today," Garrett concluded, his voice thick with emotion, "we're not just leaving with diplomas. We're leaving with the knowledge that we have the power to change the world, that when we stand together, there's no challenge too great, no divide too wide to bridge." As he stepped down from the podium to thunderous applause, Garrett felt a profound sense of closure and of new beginnings. The chapter of their lives at Brookside High was ending, but the story they had started was far from over. In the weeks that followed graduation, Garrett and his friends worked tirelessly to lay the groundwork for their new organization. They called it Bridge the Gap, a nod to their mission of connecting communities and closing the educational divide. As summer waned and the time came for them to part ways, heading off to colleges and new adventures, there was a bittersweet quality to their goodbyes. But there was also an unshakable sense of hope and determination. They had changed Brookside High, and now they were setting out to change the world. On his last night in town, Garrett stood on the hill overlooking Brookside. The lights of the town twinkled below, a tapestry of lives intertwined. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the challenges, the triumphs, the friendships forged in the fires of adversity. As he turned to leave, ready to embark on the next chapter of his life, Garrett felt a profound sense of gratitude. Brookside had given him more than he could have ever imagined, a purpose, a family, and a belief in the power of one person to make a difference. The story of Garrett Jacobs in Brookside High was not ending. It was evolving, spreading, inspiring others to take up the cause of educational equity and social justice. And as Garrett looked to the future, he knew that the greatest chapters were yet to be written. The stars shone brightly overhead, a reminder of the limitless possibilities that lay ahead. With a heart full of hope and a mind set on changing the world, Garrett took his first steps towards the future, a future he and his friends had fought so hard to make brighter for everyone. In a world that often seems divided and hopeless, remember that you have the power to make a difference. Garrett's story shows us that one person, armed with determination and supported by friends, can spark a revolution of kindness and equality. Your voice matters. Your actions, no matter how small, can create ripples that turn into waves of change. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right, even when it feels like you're standing alone. Because you're not alone, there are others out there, waiting for someone to take that first brave step. Life will present you with challenges, moments where it seems easier to give up than to keep fighting. But it's in these moments that your true strength emerges. Every obstacle you overcome not only makes you stronger, but also paves the way for others to follow. Remember, change doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey of small victories, setbacks, and perseverance. But every step forward, no matter how small, is a step towards a better world. You have the power to bridge gaps, to bring people together, to challenge injustice and inequality. Your compassion, your courage, your willingness to listen and understand, these are your superpowers. So, as you go out into the world, carry with you the spirit of Garrett and his friends. Believe in yourself, stand up for others, and never underestimate the power of unity. You are not just one person, you are a catalyst for change, a beacon of hope, a bridge between what is and what could be. Your story, like Garrett's, has the power to inspire, to heal, to transform. So make it a story worth telling. Because in the end, it's not just about changing a school or a community or even the world. It's about changing hearts, one person at a time. You have that power. Use it wisely, use it bravely, use it with love. The world is waiting for you to make your mixtage. So go out there and write your own incredible story of change. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through Garrett's story at Brookside High. May your support and engagement mean the world to us and fuel our passion for creating meaningful, inspiring content. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story. Your feedback is invaluable and helps us craft even better narratives in the future. And if you enjoyed Garrett's journey and would like to see more stories like this, please leave a comment with the number 1. Excited to know what happens next in Garrett's life? Curious about the future of Brookside High and the Bridge the Gap initiative? And if you're eager for a part 2, let us know by commenting with the number 2. We also welcome any constructive criticism or differing viewpoints. If there are aspects of the story you disagree with or areas you think could be improved, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights help us grow and evolve as storytellers. Lastly, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your subscription is a powerful way to support our team and ensure we can continue bringing you inspiring stories that touch hearts and spark change. Remember, every view, every comment, and every subscription is a vote of confidence in our work and a step towards creating more content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community and for believing in the power of storytelling to make a difference.